And now for the second round-table discussion of our 2-hour US election special here today. I'm joined by Ron Soffer, lawyer and US political expert. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. And William Jordan, a former US State Department official. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to have a look back at what happened during this election process and also discuss what we can expect for the next 4 years. Now, I will put this to you first, Ron. Well, to both of you. We can all interject at any time, but to you first, Ron. Look at Bernie Sanders. This is a quote from a friend of mine, Stephen McGlinchey, who is an Irishman who's based in Moscow. And these are things that were coming over the internet all day on Facebook, on Twitter. He put up on his Facebook page, so Bernie was beating Trump by double digits in polls, yet the Democrats maneuvered to shut him out so their preferred candidate got the nomination. Well, that went well. Thank you very much. Now, would Trump have lost, do you believe, if Sanders had actually got the Democratic ticket after the primaries?
Well, it's difficult to say. I doubt it. I think Trump probably would have won against Bernie Sanders. I think that the main losers of this elections are all the pollsters and all the pundits. I think that this is another one of those polls that probably would have been wrong.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think just anybody who works in a polling agency anywhere in the world at the moment really has to be asking themselves some very searching questions, because not only did they get the polls wrong for Trump, but of course, the other one was Brexit. I mean, this was only 4.5 months ago, where Brexit was everybody said, oh no, there's no way it'll go through. And of course, it was the surprise that everybody woke up to on June 24th. But yet again, moving back to the elections themselves, I mean, it was a very divisive campaign that was fought over there. And let's just say that come the 20th of January 2017, what can we expect from the Trump administration? Now, he has alienated himself from most senior Republicans. I mean, even the ones that he ran against in the primaries, from Cruz, Kasich, and of course, veteran politicians like John McCain, who he basically insulted. Now, who amongst you both, who do you think that will actually be filling these positions of power around Trump come next January?
Well, let me just start by saying that I think your Freudian slip of talking about election protest rather than election process yes. was actually quite correct. I mean, I think that the main message of this election has been that on both the Democratic and the Republican sides, the message here is a refusal to accept the status quo on either side. And while Hillary Clinton, obviously as the more establishment candidate, would have had a much easier time forming her team, you're absolutely right to put a finger on the challenge that Trump is going to have, because he has alienated a lot of people in the Republican establishment, including on the foreign policy and national security side, and a number of people, scores of people, in fact, who were in preceding Republican administrations, going all the way back to Ronald Reagan, who, of course, is considered the touchstone of what Republicanism is supposed to...
Grand old party values,
right.
Indeed, yeah.
As a stand for, he's going to have a hard time bringing people together, but he's tried to make the pitch in his speech this morning that, I won't say it's quite bygones, let bygones be bygones, but he's willing to, let those who want to come back, into the fold, sort of make their case. And I suppose that there will be probably a number of Republicans who will look more closely at what Donald Trump actually seems to stand for, which, to be honest with you, is quite mushy. It's quite imprecise, and they might see in there that there's a point in coming back to try to help shape the administration in order to maintain as much of the continuity that the U.S. as a major world power needs to maintain.
Well, couldn't one say also as well that just looking back that even under the Bush administration, when he was voting in, he had Dick Cheney, who was really kind of like the man who was planted there to make sure that he didn't mess up. But anyhow, just for your opinion on that, Ron.
I think that the other losers in this election result, the stunning election result, are the high priests of this new religion called political correctness. And here you have a candidate that got away with saying the most politically incorrect things, and the people have basically said, we don't want censorship. We would like to hear whatever people have to say, and we will decide what's right and what's wrong. And now, I think that in view of this stunning victory, even the Republicans that were not so happy to see Trump win will have to come around. And I'm not sure whether they will want to be subjected to a politically incorrect wrath of someone who probably will not hesitate to say what's on his mind if they stand in his way.
Well, this is the whole thing. There are many indications that that neoliberalism failed to tune into the realities of working class America, or the grassroots, the people who feel disenfranchised, who wanted to have straight talking, say it as it is, and this. So, do you believe it's actually the neoliberal system, or the followers of neoliberalism and all the hipsters that go with it, that actually just handed the presidency to Trump? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I believe so. I think that the people want to hear straight talk. I think that a positive aspect of all of this is that I think that future candidates will probably understand that going into the private lives of candidates, their sexual life and private life does not work. That this tape that they found recording Trump saying very nasty things just did not work, and maybe the next political campaign, the next campaigns will be a lot more civilized, because finding dirt just does not work.
Well, if I can just say, I disagree a little bit with that. I mean, I think that what the American people have wanted for a long time is they've wanted straight talk. I mean, they've wanted people who are not just sort of spinning the same stuff that they've been hearing, the sort of talking points that all administrations end up generating. They're looking for maybe not simple answers to complex questions, but they want people to be able to relate to them on an authentic basis. And, this is one of the paradoxes, is that even though Bill Clinton was one of the most judicially hounded presidents, and he was savagely attacked by the far right, he, for many years, has had one of the highest ratings among ex-presidents, largely because people remember that he was somebody who could connect with the average Joe, and who could actually put things in terms that didn't just sound like policy speak. Unlike, I hate to say it, his wife who tended to come across as being something of a Washington establishment automaton.
Well, also, of course, you can say that back in the 1990s, I mean, America was enjoying the biggest economic boom in its history at the time, and he was guiding that. So, I mean, one could look to say that people will look back, I suppose, with a bit of a teary eye. But now, as it stands, there's another little thing I just want to bring up that I saw. Obviously, the social media was going crazy this morning. Another colleague and friend of mine, Ulf Klerwall, who's based here in Paris, he's an economist. He said today, the last time the Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency was back in 1928. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's I'm quoting him. Right. And however, he's making the comparisons with the current economic situation and the characteristics of the current president-elect and his entourage. We are probably somewhere between 1928 and 1933 in terms of timeline, with the current technologies and nuclear weapons as icing on the cake. Now, do you believe that these parallels should be heeded? I mean, with control of both houses, will Donald Trump be like a kid in a candy store and dismantle Obamacare, trade agreements, climate accords, and, of course, another big question that hasn't really been mentioned is, what about Cuba?
Well, I would say that I agree with part of that analogy, going back to 1928. But remember, in 1928, when Herbert Hoover took over or was elected president, you were coming still on the end of almost 10 years or about 10 years of great prosperity in the United States. And this assumption that this laissez-faire approach to the economy was just going to go on forever and ever. What people didn't realize, and I think people are much more savvy now, is how much was being built up that was just bad debt, that was poor economic policy, poor monetary policy in particular, and that what's happening now, I think is quite different. I'm not sure also that Donald Trump is sort of Herbert Hoover or the Republican or a Republican of the 1920s era. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of Republicans around him and in the Congress who sort of hearken back to that, who still feel some sort of historical resentment against the New Deal and everything that was brought in ever since, and are trying to go back to some sort of orthodoxy as they defined it back then. The key thing for Donald Trump is going to be that he is somebody who believes that infrastructure needs to be overhauled in the United States. That is something that cuts against the grain of those in the Republican Party, particularly the Tea Party, and those who believe in very small government and reducing fiscal expenditures. I'm also not convinced that the Obamacare repeal, I mean, this whole thing about getting rid of President Obama's legacy in as quickly and as completely as possible, necessarily translates into going back to no sort of healthcare system that may not be Obamacare, but that would be similar to something like Obamacare.
A repealed Obamacare. Ron, what about yourself? What do you think?
I think that in addition to controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency, the President Trump will have to fill the vacancy in the Supreme Court of the United States. Mm-hmm. He may also, which will basically reestablish the former, at least at the very beginning, the balance of power in the Supreme Court that existed before the death of Justice Scalia. Mm-hmm. And he might also move the court towards by appointing two, maybe even three justices. And I think that from as Europeans, we have to, if you look at the recent decisions of the Supreme Court of the United States, what I find interesting is the move away from the extraterritorial application of U.S. law outside of the United States. The Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, have basically said that, in principle, U.S. law applies only in the United States, and only in specific cases where Congress specifically wanted it to apply outside of the United States, then it should be applied in an extraterritorial manner. And I think that this is important for business. Businesses that find themselves having to deal with cases at once all over the world. I think it's probably going to be an interesting period as far as that is concerned.
Mm-hmm. Could I just say on the Supreme Court, I mean, I agree that the first order of business is going to be replacing Antonin Scalia, and it will, as you say, reestablish sort of this balance, in favor of the more conservative view on the court. But let's remember the timeline of politics in the United States. And this is the one thing that, although I think the Democrats will have a very serious moment of reckoning over what just happened, in 2 years there will be midterm elections. And while I think that as far as the Senate is concerned, this was supposed to have been the good year, or the easy year for the Democrats, 2 years hence it may be more difficult, but depending on how the politics play out, and I don't take as a given that Donald Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress are going to have a symbiotic relationship, or even a happy honeymoon. It could be that, assuming Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for example, holds on for another 2 years, that the balance of power in the Senate in particular could change. And that would have a significant impact over what Donald Trump could do if, as far as appointing a new Supreme Court justice. If the Ginsburg and others hold on for a full 4 years, we could be at the point where there will be another election. Perhaps the Democrats will figure out how they need to come up with a stronger and more appealing candidate, in which case, maybe you've staunched the worst, and you're kind of not changed the balance as far as the Supreme Court judges are concerned, but you've at least been able to maintain what you've been living with for so long.
Well, also the Democrats are going to have to channel that energy that we did see mobilized by the Sanders campaign. I mean, basically, once Sanders left, or once he was out of the primaries, it seemed that, well, Clinton was hoping to get all of the Sanders voters on board, but there were also the Bernie or bust people. So,
I just want to say, I think it will be interesting to see, because Mr. Trump's party will have control of the Senate, I think that he will be able to have his cabinet confirmed in a much easier process than would have been if the other side was controlling the Senate. And it'll be interesting to see, this is his opportunity to bring new people,
new blood,
people who are not necessarily politicians, as he promised during the campaign, and give them cabinet positions, and maybe the confirmation process will not turn into the Inquisition that it usually is, and maybe we will see new blood in the cabinet.
So that's, I suppose, shaking up Capitol Hill, be it for the better, for the worse. I mean, that's yet to be seen. But I mean, now, President Obama is still president until the 20th of January. He's going to be meeting with Donald Trump this week, this Thursday, I believe. They will have to have the meeting, talk about their transition, which is always the way. And we have to look back. This time 8 years ago, actually this very time 8 years ago, the world was celebrating the arrival of Barack Obama, the miracle worker, the first black president, the first African-American president. But do you think now, with what has happened, that Obama's legacy will be looked at with some disappointment because he didn't work the miracles that he actually promised he could, or he said he would try to solve?
I think so. Well, let's also remember that 8 years ago, when President-elect Obama was preparing to come into office, there was a major meltdown economically, and it sort of fostered an entirely different climate in terms of bipartisan cooperation. This is going to be happening, against the backdrop of some very, very bad and bruised feelings. I think that President Obama is a man of great principle, whatever anybody thinks. He will do everything that is absolutely necessary to make this transition work. But he is going to be, I think, personally aggrieved that much of what he considers stands as his major legacy is going to be very quickly, or could be very quickly, chipped away by the incoming administration. That's going to be a very, very bitter pill to swallow. I think that again, depends on how the Democrats regroup, but this may be this kind of thing that all of the constituencies, whether you're talking about African Americans or Hispanics, worried about immigration measures that Obama had to take executive action to move forward. That will be potentially, where the new mobilization happens, thinking 2 years down the road towards the midterms.
Now, Ron, just say it first. We're just running out of time now, so we're going to have to keep it quick. We'll wrap it all up. What about yourself? Do you believe it'll be...
One of the areas that I was disappointed in is that there was no real criminal justice reform in the United States. I don't think that the United States can continue incarcerating 1% of its population, which is staggering. I mean, if you compare it to France, where 1 promille is incarcerated, it's 10 times more per capita.
Also the demographic is...
Something has to be done to stop this process where courts have to impose these horrendous sentences and keep people in jail for years and years.
Well, I mean, one can say now that, well, look, California has legalized cannabis, so that might keep a few people out of jail now if it's actually legalized, because these smaller demeanors. Well, I mean, that's all we have now for today for our election special. I'd like to thank William Jordan. Thank you very much for coming on the program. And Ron Soffer, thank you very much for joining us here today on an historic day where Donald Trump was elected the 45th President of the United States of America. From all of us here at Paris Live PM, thank you very much. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.